The water off the Iberian Peninsula in 2020 held a pattern no one had recorded before. A white and black dorsal fin would rise beside a small sailing boat, and then the rudder would feel it. A firm, deliberate press, not a bite. The first reports came in with the careful language of people who had watched their tiller snap. Somewhere under the Strait of Gibraltar, a subpopulation of orcas had discovered something. They had discovered the rudder and what it could do when they leaned against it. By the time the phenomenon reached the Bay of Biscay, the word attack had already settled into headlines. Yet the scientists watching from research vessels kept using a quieter word. They said interactions. The orcas were not hunting. They were not circling like predators around a seal. They came alongside, found the steering gear, and pushed. The intent, anyone admitted, was unclear. But the pattern was specific, repeated, and oddly precise, the way a child returns to the same loose tooth. The boat that sunk off Portugal in those months became a kind of milestone. National Geographic reported it plainly. Orcas off Portugal had sunk yet another boat. The hull went down slowly, the crew reached shore, and the experts interviewed did not describe rage. They described play. Researchers who had spent decades watching these animals kept returning to the word game. What looked like a siege from the deck looked from underwater like a session of practice. You have probably heard a thud under a hull and told yourself it was a log, a wave, nothing. There's a specific feeling when the sound repeats, measured, patient, curious. The orcas seemed to understand the boat as a single object with a weak point. They did not tear at the hull. They went straight for the rudder, every time. Scientists compiling witness accounts, photos, and videos began to notice the same detail. One target chosen again and again, as if the boat itself were a puzzle with one correct answer. A BBC-cited expert put it plainly. The behavior has nothing to do with aggression nor revenge. There is no evidence of a grudge, no injured orca launching a campaign. Instead, the reports describe something closer to a fashion, a trend that spread through a community. Marine biologists use the phrase learned cultural behavior. An orca calf watches an adult press a rudder. The calf mimics the press. The adult circles back to check the result. And the ocean inside that circle begins to look less like a battlefield and more like a boat camp. By November 2025, the count had reached 761 interactions between the Gladis orcas and boats around the Iberian Peninsula. 761 separate times a vessel reported contact. Not all ended in damage. Some orcas merely slid alongside, nudged once, and swam on. But across those encounters, researchers identified 15 individuals in the population as boat bumpers, confirmed by witness accounts, by photographs, by video that sailors captured with shaking hands. 15 orcas responsible for a pattern that made global news. The numbers are precise because the tracking was meticulous. Every interaction was logged with a time, a location, a vessel type. The data published in November 2025 gave researchers something no anecdote could. A map. The interactions clustered along the strait, spread into open water, and repeated at irregular intervals like a route between known places. The orcas were not lost. They were moving between sites, teaching each other where the boats gathered. One of the most consistent observations is duration. The typical Iberian orca interaction lasts less than 30 minutes. Some stretch to 2 hours, but most are brief. A burst of focused activity, then a release. The animals arrive, work the rudder, and leave. There is no lingering, no circling for a second pass. It resembles a training drill more than a hunt. The economy of motion is striking, efficient, almost choreographed. A video analysis of the encounters added another layer. Tooth raking is a known orca behavior that leaves scars on other orcas, often during social friction. Researchers studied those marks to understand the species' baseline interactions. The boat-bumping orcas displayed none of that aggressive edge. They did not slap the water in anger or thrash their heads. They used a flat, patient pressure. A shoulder against a rudder, a tail lifting precisely. The same motion, repeated. The conclusion drawn was that the force applied was calibrated, not explosive. Sailors who lived through the encounters described a strange orderliness. The orcas would approach in a line, sometimes 3 or 4 animals, and take turns. One pressed the rudder, another watched, a third circled behind, waiting for its moment. The animals follow the boats and ram the rudders until they are destroyed, one report recorded. But the destruction was slow, deliberate, almost ceremonial. There were no frantic bites. There was no feeding frenzy. Just the patient work of a task being completed. And through all of it, no human was harmed. Not one. No humans have been harmed so far, the documentary source noted, and the statement carried a weight that the global headlines had missed entirely. People had lost boats. They had lost time, money, and the comfort of a safe voyage, but not a single person had been hurt. The orcas had every opportunity to cause injury. They did not take it. That fact is so consistent that it has become part of the definition of the behavior. The distinction between attack and interaction hinges on intent, and intent is exactly what scientists refuse to assume. National Geographic's reporting was careful. Experts said the behavior was more likely play than calculated revenge. The word calculating is key. Revenge would require the orcas to pair a memory with a target, to link a past injury to a present boat. There is no evidence that any of the 15 boat bumpers ever had a negative encounter with humans that would justify such a link. What the evidence does show is a social spread. The pattern did not explode across all orca populations. It stayed within this Iberian subpopulation, among the Gladis orcas and their associates. Young animals picked it up from older ones. The behavior crossed family lines, passed between pods that met in the strait. Scientists watching this recognized the signature of culture. Not instinct, not individual innovation, but shared, transmitted practice. The ocean inside that transmission became a kind of camp. The Strait of Gibraltar is a corridor, a narrow passage between continents where ships converge. The orcas had turned that corridor into a classroom. Boats were the objects of study. Rudders were the variables. Each new interaction was a lesson, repeated until the skill was smooth. This is the image that reframed the entire story. Not orcas at war with boats, but orcas at practice, refining a cultural artifact. The BBC Future reporting anchored the reframe with a direct quote from a scientist. "These are not attacks. It is almost certainly a game. A game has rules. A game has participants who choose to play. A game can be learned, refined, passed on." The scientist's certainty, almost certainly, came from years of observing how these particular orcas move, how they signal to each other before and after an interaction, how they seem to take turns. That reframe changes what we are watching. We are not seeing a conflict. We are seeing a culture teach itself. Subscribe if you want to keep observing these transmissions, because the next session in the Strait is already being documented. Tell me in the comments which word you now hear differently: game, classroom, or culture. Another BBC Future expert pushed further. We know that it's a complex behavior that has nothing to do with aggression nor revenge. The ellipsis in the quote marks a deliberate pause, the scientist stepping back from the frame the public had built. Aggression and revenge are human narratives, mapped onto animal movement. The expert's job was to correct the projection. The behavior is complex. It is learned. It is social, but it is not a war. The question that kept appearing in research margins was simpler. Why rudders? Why not the hull, the sails, the propeller? The hull is the largest surface, the most obvious target, but the orcas ignored it. They chose the narrow, moving blade at the stern, the part of the boat that turns, that responds, that changes direction when touched. It is the most interactive part of a vessel. A pressing orca can feel the rudder push back, can see the boat swerve in response. The feedback is immediate. That feedback loop is the core of play. A game needs a response. A touch that produces a visible change in the world is satisfying, repeatable, engaging. The orcas found the one part of the boat that moves when you move against it. They pressed, the boat turned, and the orca learned a new rule of physics. The boat became a toy, and the toy had a single fascinating switch. The 15 boat bumpers became minor celebrities in the sailing community. Photographs captured their dorsal fins, their distinctive nicks and scratches. Each animal had a name assigned by researchers, a history of encounters. Some were known to work in pairs. Others seemed to prefer going solo. The data on them grew into a catalog, individuals with preferences, techniques, even apparent roles within the group. Sailors began to share avoidance strategies, and the strategies themselves revealed how predictable the orcas had become. If a boat turned off its engine and stopped, the interaction often ended sooner. If the skipper reversed course, the orcas sometimes lost interest. The animals seemed to crave the moving rudder, the active game. A stationary boat was boring. The behavior, observed through this lens, looked like any animal's pursuit of a stimulus, enticing while it responds, abandoned when it stops. The longest interactions stretched to 2 hours, but those were the exceptions. Most were brief, and the majority left the boat intact. The 14 and 15 animals working the rudders were precise enough to disable without destroying. Some boats limped to port with a broken steerage but a whole hull. The orcas had achieved their apparent goal: interaction, response, game, without the collateral damage that an actual predator would cause. The question of why this subpopulation, and not another, remains open. The Strait of Gibraltar is a crossroads. Atlantic orcas mingle with Mediterranean groups. Yet the behavior clustering in this narrow band of water did not bleed outward. This suggests a small, tight-knit community, one with strong social bonds and a shared willingness to learn from each other. The boat camp was not an ocean-wide phenomenon, it was a local tradition. And that tradition, once established, has proven remarkably durable. The 761 interactions span years, not weeks. The behavior did not fade after the initial shock. It persisted, evolved, even refined. New boats entered the zone and experienced the same rudder work. The pattern held steady, a cultural practice with a life of its own, independent of any single orca. No humans have been harmed so far, not one. The phrase, repeated across sources, has become a quiet counterweight to the chaos of the headlines. Boats sunk, expeditions ruined, insurance claims filed, but bodies untouched. The orcas, in their apparent play, maintained a boundary that aggression would have crossed. The game had rules, and the rules kept everyone safe. There is a temptation to read meaning into this restraint, to call it mercy or wisdom. But the scientists who study the behavior caution against that. The orcas likely did not decide to spare humans. They simply were not interested in humans. The interest was the rudder, the moving blade that answered their pressure. People were incidental, cargo, bystanders in the game. Their safety came not from the orcas' kindness, but from the orcas' focus. The picture that emerges is of a community of animals who found a new object in their world and taught each other how to play with it. The ocean inside the Strait of Gibraltar, once a transit route, became a playground with a specific piece of equipment. The boats were the equipment. The rudders were the moving parts. And the 15 boat bumpers were the instructors, circulating the lesson through the population. It is tempting to call them pirates. The image of a giant orca attacking a boat is cinematic, immediate, and entirely wrong. The orcas did not come to steal or to destroy. They came to touch, to turn, to test. The piracy narrative was a human overlay, a familiar story imposed on an unfamiliar pattern. Beneath it, a quieter process was unfolding, the transmission of a playful tradition. The scientists monitoring these encounters began to learn something else. The orcas did not treat every boat the same. A fast-moving yacht drew one kind of response. A slow, heavy fishing vessel drew another. The animals seemed to read the boat before they touched it, circling once, sometimes twice, as if assessing the size of the rudder and the speed of the turn. Sailors who watched this approach described a kind of inspection, a pause before the press. That pause matters. Predators do not pause to assess their prey's steering system. They commit, strike, and consume. The orcas did none of that. They hovered, looked, and then engaged with a precision that suggested deliberate study. This is the signature of curiosity, not hunger, and curiosity, in a social species, is the engine of culture. The rudder work also varies by individual. Some of the 15 boat bumpers favored a direct shoulder press. Others used their tail, lifting it in a controlled arc to strike the blade from below. A few appeared to bite, but the tooth marks found on recovered rudders were shallow, more like grips than tears. Each animal seemed to have a preferred technique, a personal style within the shared tradition. This individual variation is exactly what researchers expect from cultural behavior. If the pattern were instinct, every orca would do it the same way. Instead, the 15 boat bumpers showed fingerprints, small differences in approach, timing, and force. The tradition had a common shape, but each practitioner added their own detail. That is how culture works, in any species. The preference for technique may also explain why some interactions disabled boats while others left them sailable. A tail strike from below could snap the rudder stock cleanly. A shoulder press might only bend it. The outcome depended on which animal engaged and how that animal had learned to play. The variation in damage was not randomness. It was the signature of individual style. For the sailors, the experience was disorienting in a specific way. The attack they had been taught to fear, a violent, predatory assault, did not come. Instead, they felt a series of measured pushes, a rhythmic pressure against the steering. Some described it as the boat being guided, not attacked. The fear was real, but the physical reality was almost gentle, a firm insistence rather than a strike. One captain, interviewed after his boat was disabled, said the orcas seemed to be testing him as much as the rudder. They would press, then pause, as if waiting to see how the boat would respond. When the boat veered, they pressed again. When it stopped moving, they lost interest. The exchange, he said, felt less like a fight and more like a conversation conducted through the hull. That conversational quality has drawn the attention of cognitive researchers. A boat that responds to pressure is, in a sense, a tool that provides feedback. The orcas are not simply pushing an object. They are manipulating a system and observing the consequences. This is problem-solving behavior, the kind that scientists study to understand how animals think about cause and effect. The implications reach beyond the Strait of Gibraltar. If orcas can develop a tradition around boat rudders, what other traditions might they hold? Researchers have long documented regional dialects in orca calls, distinct vocal patterns passed down through generations. The rudder work sits alongside those dialects as another learned, transmitted behavior. The species' capacity for culture is broader than once assumed. The rudder work now sits beside regional dialects as a learned tradition. If this slow, evidence-based look at animal culture is what you come here for, subscribe so the next quiet observation reaches you. Write the word culture in the comments if seeing orcas this way stayed with you after the hull went still. This reframing changes the way scientists listen to the ocean. The hull of a boat, thudding under pressure, is now understood as a possible site of learning. The orcas are not only responding to their environment, they are shaping it, teaching each other to interact with human objects in new ways. The ocean inside the strait is not just a corridor. It is a place where two species' worlds overlap and adjust. The adjustment has been one-sided in a surprising way. The orcas changed their behavior dramatically, inventing a new tradition. Humans, by contrast, have mostly responded with avoidance, rerouting, anchoring, waiting. The orcas are the innovators in this story. They found a new game, The humans are still catching up, adjusting their maps and their expectations. There is a quiet lesson in that asymmetry. The ocean is often described as a wilderness, a place where human influence ends. But the strait shows something else. A shared space where animal behavior evolves in response to human objects and human behavior evolves in response to animals. The two are entangled, each shaping the other. The orcas turned the boats into equipment for play. The boats turned the orcas into a global phenomenon. The global attention, in turn, created a new pressure on the researchers. They had to correct the record gently, without dismissing the sailors' real fear. The scientists walked a careful line, acknowledging the disruption while insisting on the accurate frame. The behavior was not an attack. It was an interaction born of curiosity and culture. Getting that right mattered because the wrong frame could lead to harmful responses. Harmful responses have been proposed. Some suggested loud devices to drive the orcas away. Others proposed hunting or capturing the 15 boat bumpers. The scientific community pushed back, arguing that punishment would be both unethical and ineffective. You do not stop a cultural tradition by removing its practitioners. You change the conditions that make the tradition rewarding. The conditions in this case are the boats themselves. The orcas engage because the rudder responds. If the rudder stops responding, if the boat goes still, the orcas lose interest. This is why the avoidance strategies worked. By removing the feedback, the sailors broke the game. The orcas moved on, looking for a boat that would play. That insight has practical value. It suggests that the interactions could be managed without harm, simply by changing the equipment or the behavior of the sailors. A rudder that locks firmly might offer less satisfying feedback. A boat that moves unpredictably might confuse the game. The research is ongoing, but the direction is clear. Coexistence through understanding, not conflict through fear. The orcas, meanwhile, show no signs of abandoning their tradition. The 761 interactions represent a committed practice, refined over years. If anything, the behavior has become more efficient. Early encounters were often clumsy, with orcas circling and pressing uncertainly. Later interactions showed smoother technique, quicker engagement, clearer roles. The tradition had matured. This maturation is visible in the youngest animals. Calves born after the tradition began already show the behavior. Learn not from trial and error, but from watching their elders. They press rudders with the same calm precision as the adults, as if the skill were inherited. It is not inherited, it is taught. But the teaching is so effective that the line between instinct and culture blurs. The blurring is the most fascinating part. For decades, scientists argued about whether non-human animals could have culture. The debates were abstract, conducted in journals and conferences. The orcas settled the question with a rudder. Here was a behavior, invented and spread, with regional variation and individual style. It met every definition of culture, rendered in the clear water of the strait. The ocean inside that argument has now become a case study. Textbooks will describe the Iberian orcas and their rudder work as an example of animal culture. Students will learn about the 15 boat bumpers, the 761 interactions, the measured pressure of a tail against fiberglass. The story is not just about orcas. It is about what it means to learn, to teach, and to play. And the game continues. The orcas still patrol the strait, still find the boats, still press the rudders. Researchers still log the encounters, still count the interactions, still refine their understanding. The cycle has not ended. It has become a fixture, a stable, ongoing tradition in a narrow corridor of ocean. The boat camp remains open. A visitor to the strait today might see nothing unusual. The water is gray, the ships move, the gulls cry. But beneath the surface, a dance continues. Orcas glide alongside hulls they have met before, returning to a game they invented years ago. The rudders turn, the boats sway, and the pattern repeats. It is not a war. It is a practice, sustained by memory and shared knowledge. The memory is not stored in any single animal. It lives in the group, in the way adults demonstrate and calves imitate, in the small corrections a mother makes to her offspring's technique. The tradition is a collective property, bigger than any one orca. When an old boat bumper passes, the knowledge does not vanish. It persists in the young who learned it long before the loss. That persistence is the quiet triumph of the story. The orcas built something that outlives individuals. They created a tradition that carries itself forward, generation after generation. The boats come and go, the sailors change, but the rudder work endures, a cultural beacon in a shifting sea. The ocean inside the strait is not the same place it was in 2020. It is richer, stranger, more alive with meaning. For the humans who study them, the orcas have become a reminder to look again. The first instinct is to label, attack, threat, problem. The second impulse is to understand. The scientists chose the second. They listened to the sailors, watched the animals, and let the evidence reshape their assumptions. The result is a more accurate, more wondrous picture of life in the ocean. The wonder is not naive. It is earned through careful observation, through hours of footage, through the patient accumulation of 761 data points. The wonder is the payoff for paying attention, and it is available to anyone willing to slow down, to watch the water, to ask why a powerful animal would choose to play instead of to harm. The answer, when it comes, is simple. The rudder is interesting. The boat is a new object, full of moving parts and responses. The orcas found it, mastered it, and shared it. They did not need a reason beyond curiosity. Curiosity is enough. It has always been enough. This is the story the ocean whispered. Not of war, but of play. Not of threat, but of learning. Not of fear, but of the endless inventiveness of animal minds. The orcas did not attack, they explored. And in exploring, they taught us something about the depth of their world and about our own place within it. The final image is not of a battle. It is of a single orca, moving past a boat at dusk, pausing briefly to press its shoulder against the rudder. The boat turns slightly, the orca slides away, and the water closes over the moment. There is no malice, no fear, no struggle. There is only contact, response, and the quiet continuation of a game that will outlast us all. The researchers began to wonder about the edges of the tradition. How far did the behavior reach beyond the rudder? They watched the orcas interact with other floating objects, buoys, driftwood, even the occasional anchored raft. The animals showed interest, but the interest faded quickly. Only the rudder, with its responsive turn, held their attention. The game required a moving part. Without it, the object lost its charm. This selectivity shaped the way scientists thought about the orcas' cognition. The animals were not randomly exploring. They were categorizing objects by their properties, sorting the world into things that respond and things that do not. This is a sophisticated form of learning, one that requires memory, comparison, and prediction. The rudder was not just a target. It was a category, a type of thing that the orcas had learned to recognize. The category, once formed, proved durable across seasons. The orcas returned to the strait year after year, and each return included the rudder work. The behavior did not depend on a single hungry season or a particular migration. It was a constant, a fixture of their annual cycle. The tradition had become part of the rhythm of their lives, as reliable as the tides. Marine biologists began to compare the Iberian orcas to other populations with known cultural traditions. In the Pacific Northwest, resident orcas had distinct dialects and hunting techniques, passed down through matrilines. In Norway, herring-feeding orcas used a cooperative carousel method to corral their prey. The Iberian orcas added a third example, a tradition built not around food, but around play. The comparison highlighted a key point. Culture in orcas is not limited to survival behaviors. The play itself, researchers noted, has a developmental function. Young orcas practice hunting skills through mock captures, refining their technique before they need it for real prey. The rudder work may serve a similar purpose. It is a way to practice coordination, timing, and cooperation without the stakes of a live hunt. The boat becomes a training partner, a safe stand-in for a more dangerous challenge. This interpretation gains weight from the observation that calves are the most enthusiastic participants. They approach the rudders with an eagerness that adults sometimes temper. The young orcas press harder, turn faster, and often linger longer. They are, in effect, students perfecting a lesson. The adults supervise, correct, and occasionally demonstrate. The boat camp is, in the truest sense, a school. The school has no fixed schedule, no curriculum, no walls. It exists wherever the boats gather. The orcas find their classroom in the movement of water and fiberglass. Each interaction is a lesson, each rudder a textbook. The tradition is not stored in a mind, it is stored in the practice itself, renewed every time an orca presses a blade and watches the boat respond. For the humans who share the water, the school has become a source of both frustration and fascination. Some sailors have learned to read the orca's approach, recognizing the early signs of an interaction. They see the dorsal fins rising, the deliberate circling, the pause before the press. The encounter, once terrifying, has become a known event with a predictable arc. Fear gives way to wary familiarity. This familiarity has produced a small body of practical knowledge. Sailors who have been through multiple interactions share tips about what works and what does not. A steady course, they say, sometimes discourages the orcas. A sudden stop can end the game. Vocal sounds from the crew have little effect. The orcas respond to the boat's motion, not to the people on it. The game is played through the vessel, not against the humans. The shared knowledge has also created a quiet community among the sailors. Those who have lost a rudder exchange stories like war veterans sharing memories. They describe the same measured pressure, the same patient circling, the same strange sense of being studied. The experience, they say, is oddly bonding. They have been through something rare, something that most sailors will never face, and they carry the memory together. Insurance companies, less sentimental, have taken a different interest. The claims from rudder damage have climbed, and adjusters have learned to recognize the pattern. A broken rudder in the Strait of Gibraltar, with no other damage, is now a known event. The orcas have become a line item in maritime risk assessments. The game, once local, has entered the world of contracts and premiums. The economic impact, while real, remains modest. Most interactions end with the boat intact. The majority of sailors continue their voyages with only a story to tell. The 14 and 15 animals working the rudders do not disable every vessel they meet. They select some, pass others, and move on. The randomness of the selection adds to the mystery, keeping the research focused on patterns rather than certainties. One pattern has emerged clearly. The interactions cluster in certain seasons and certain conditions. Calm water, light wind, and a slow-moving boat seem to attract more attention. The orcas appear to prefer conditions that allow a steady approach and a controlled press. In rough seas, the interactions drop off. The game is harder to play when the boat is already moving unpredictably. The orcas choose their moments: calm water, light wind, a slow-moving boat. The orcas wait for these conditions, and that pattern is too consistent to ignore. If you want to follow this quiet intelligence as the next observations surface, subscribe and remain with the channel. In the comments, tell us which detail caught you first. Write calm water if the stillness stood out, or chosen moment if the timing felt deliberate. That deliberation is exactly what the next part of the story turns on. The choice of moments reveals a calculation that is easy to miss. The orcas are not impulsive. They wait, assess, and engage when conditions favor them. This is the behavior of animals that understand their own limitations and advantages. The game is not a reflex. It is a considered activity, undertaken when the odds of a good interaction are high. The orcas, in their way, are strategists. The strategy extends to the choice of target. The rudder is not always the first point of contact. Some interactions begin with the orcas circling the hull, pressing the bow, or nudging the keel. These preliminary touches seem to test the boat's responsiveness. Only when the boat reacts do the orcas move to the rudder. The approach is methodical, a sequence of steps leading to the main event. This methodical quality has inspired a new line of research. Scientists are studying how the orcas communicate during interactions, using hydrophones to record the sounds beneath the surface. The preliminary results are suggestive. The orcas emit specific calls and clicks during the approach, a chatter that changes as they begin the rudder work. There is coordination, a shared signal that organizes the group's efforts. The coordination is visible in the turns the orcas take. One animal presses while others wait. When the first breaks away, the second moves in. The sequence is smooth, almost rehearsed. This is not the chaotic activity of a mob. It is the ordered behavior of a team. The orcas have divided the roles among themselves, and each knows its part in the routine. The division of roles hints at a deeper social structure. The 15 boat bumpers are not a random collection of individuals. They include animals of different ages, both sexes, and different family lines. The older ones seem to lead, the younger ones to follow. This hierarchy is common in orca societies, where knowledge flows from elders to juniors. The rudder work has become another channel for that flow. The flow of knowledge is not one way. Scientists have observed young orcas trying new techniques that the adults later adopt. A calf might discover a more efficient way to press a rudder, and the adults watching will incorporate the innovation. The tradition is not static. It evolves, shaped by the contributions of each generation. The boat camp is a living thing, growing and changing with its members. The evolution is visible in the data. Early interactions were often clumsy, marked by uncertain circling and hesitant presses. Later interactions show smoother technique, faster engagement, and clearer roles. The tradition has been refined by practice. Each new generation builds on the last, adding small improvements that accumulate over time. The game, once new, has become polished. The polishing has a cost. The orcas that participate risk injury from ropes, propellers, and the sharp edges of damaged rudders. The reports do not record serious harm, but the risk is real. A tail caught in a line, a fin scraped by fiberglass. These are the small prices of the game. The orcas accept the risk, or perhaps they simply do not consider it. The play is worth the danger. The acceptance of risk is common in playful animals. Young mammals, in particular, frequently expose themselves to danger during play, learning the limits of their bodies and the rules of their environment. The orcas, by engaging with boats, are doing the same. The rudder work is a form of exploration with consequences, a way to test the world and their own abilities within it. The testing extends to the humans. The orcas seem to be exploring the limits of human response as much as the limits of the rudder. When sailors react with fear, the orcas continue. When sailors stay calm, the orcas sometimes break off sooner. The animals are reading the people as much as the boats. The interaction is a two-way study, an exchange of information across the species divide. This exchange is the heart of the story. The ocean inside the strait is not just a place where boats pass, it is a meeting ground, a site of mutual observation. The orcas watch the humans watch the orcas. The rudder is the point of contact, the shared object that brings them together. The game, in its way, is a bridge. The bridge is fragile. A single serious injury could change everything. The scientists are aware of this, and they advocate for careful management. The goal is to preserve the tradition without endangering either species. The path forward is uncertain, but the researchers agree on one point. The answer lies in understanding, not in force. The game must be allowed to continue if it can. The continuation depends on the orcas' willingness to keep playing. There is no guarantee that they will. The tradition could fade as quickly as it appeared if conditions change or interest wanes. The orcas are free agents, bound only by their own curiosity. The observers can only watch and wait and hope to learn something before the game moves on. The researchers who watch these animals have learned to hold their conclusions lightly. They know the data can shift, that a tradition can change course, that the orcas may one day find a new object more interesting than a rudder. The 761 interactions are a snapshot, a moment in a longer story that is still being written. The scientists do not pretend to know the ending, they only know what they have seen. What they have seen is enough to challenge the old certainties about animal minds. The orcas did not need to be taught that the rudder could move. They discovered it themselves through trial and error, through patient observation. They built a tradition from that discovery, passing it down through generations. The ocean inside the strait has become a living laboratory, a place where the boundaries between instinct and culture dissolve. The dissolution is not a loss, it is a gain, a widening of the human understanding of what it means to be intelligent, to be social, to be alive. The orcas have shown that play is not a luxury, a frivolous activity reserved for the young and the idle. It is a serious business, a way of learning, a means of building culture. The rudder work is proof that curiosity can be a force as powerful as hunger. And so, the story returns to where it began. To the water, to the boats, to the quiet persistence of the game. The orcas still patrol the strait. The sailors still navigate their courses. The interactions still occur, logged and studied and understood a little better each time. The pattern holds not because anyone wills it, but because it has become part of the rhythm of the place. There is no grand conclusion to draw, no tidy moral to extract. There is only the observed fact of a community of animals who found a way to play, and a community of humans who found a way to watch. The two have learned to share the water, not without friction, but without harm. The game continues, and the ocean holds it all, the movement, the memory, the endless invention of minds at play.